2 speed. So if you've never joined for a speed VOD review, what happens is it times 2 speed. Okay, I'm going to try to pause as seldom as possible, and we're not really gonna talk too much about the picks and bans unless I see something going like horribly wrong. And what I mean by that is we're not gonna talk about them as they're occurring, because in order to do that, you either have to be following the championship series closely, which I'm not, or you have to have insider knowledge of the players' champion pools, what they're playing inside of scrims, what they're likely to play, what's their history, etc. And I'm not using any of that, so that's just completely gone outside of the window. So we're just not going to talk about that because it would be poor to do. I don't like Udyr as a pick, especially not that early, because I feel like he can be worked against. It's not necessarily that the pick itself is bad, I just think that showing it this early on is definitely bizarre. Although it is probably a pick that's not going to be contested, so you could view it as that, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to pick anything else. You're able to conserve your picks until you know more info about the enemy team. But the thing is that Udyr is able to be worked against much easier than a lot of other champions. And it opens yourself up to being weak to some things. I don't like the LeBlanc pick, because if she's picked into double AD carry, the problem is that she can't just simply delete one of the AD carries. Especially not if it's Corki Ezreal, because both of them pose such a threat that it's really difficult for her to do what she needs to do in order to win them the team fight. It is a little bit interesting because Cloud9's team comp is a little bit neutral, so hold on, let's just pause, okay? So these are the final team comps. So in terms of like win conditions, you already know right off the bat that Lulu can't do anything to Jax, and if Jax gets fed enough, and I think Cloud9 is what, or CLG is red side, so the outlet for the bottom side split push from Jax. Now obviously we always talk about bottom side split pushes. Very seldom do you ever talk about top side split pushes because it's a very rare occurrence, and generally it's only going to occur on actually a champion like Jax or like Tryndamere, Teemo, anyone like that has a lot of maneuverability and a lot of escape routes that can actually go out through the top lane. But generally, a lot of top laners are going to be relatively unsafe pushing from the top line. So the bottom line works directly into red side's favor because it's the furthest location from Baron, and it's also able to mutually synergize with basically inadvertently attacking Dragon. So what you can see right now is that there is no real answer to Jax in the later stages of the game. Okay, additionally, there's no real answer to Udyr. Even though CLG picked him that early on, there's really nothing that directly just shuts him down or directly stops him, which is a little bit interesting because I feel like that you definitely can draft against him a lot better, because when you pick Udyr, you end up tunneling into a playstyle or some sort of champion comp that is going to be directly synergized with him, because he is not a standalone champion. There are a few standalone champions, one of which is actually LeBlanc, in that she can be flexed into a myriad of comps, and it doesn't really overall impact the comp too much, negatively or positively. Obviously, you can have comps sculpted around her, but generally that's not going to be the case. So anyways, Cloud9's only real win condition now is going to be either an acceleration off of mid lane, and that's why you have the proactive jungler, which isn't just proactive, but he's an extremely powerful jungler coming out of Lee Sin, comboed with the LeBlanc dynamic. The blue side Lulu into the red side Jax is going to work directly into Jax and Udyr's favor, so that's going to be a little bit awkward if there's no sort of line swap to negate any sort of that pressure that can be created in top lane. The Bard's a little bit interesting. I don't totally understand why the Bard pick's there, because I feel like there's other support picks that could be better than Bard, given how the team comps played out, although I didn't see how, I did see, I just don't recall how or where Bard was picked, but it doesn't matter. We're not going to actually look back at that. So anyways, the thing about CLG is they can take fights in condensed areas, because even though LeBlanc is relatively good at picking even though LeBlanc is relatively good at picking off Ezreal, Corki, and Bard, you can't just assassinate Bard or Corki. So the problem is going to be, it's a little bit bizarre that LeBlanc actually has to go for a snipe onto Bard, which is a little bit awkward, because if you snipe Corki, it doesn't matter, Ezreal is still able to kite backwards and make use of the team fight, and on top of that, if you don't get a clean snipe, in the sense that if you end up taking collateral damage or something, it's going to really be really bad for Cloud9. The other thing, though, is that CLG benefits from a 3v3 more than Cloud9 benefits from a 3v3. And what I mean by that is if there's a 5v5 that occurs outside of Dragon Pit or outside of in front of Baron or inside of CLG's red side jungle, because for the most part CLG isn't going to be taking fights inside of the jungle because that's just not how their team comp operates. They're either going to orchestrate team fights via split pushes, via 1.5 split pushes, and what I mean by that is like Jack split pushing and Udyr backing up, and they're basically going to be stalemating lanes via the Corki Ezreal stall. So CLG's comp, even though on the surface it looks like a split push and a poke comp, it's not. I actually think it's more so of a split push and stall comp, and it's much more of a lock comp. It can transition into poke because it has the gears that are able to do that, and it can definitely just mutate into that if the game calls for it, but on the surface, I don't think that's what they're going to do. So I think the only way CLG wins this game is via a split push, or via a stall lock into just superior play and getting a Baron and just winning through standard means. Cloud9, on the other hand, again, they can't really go into a 3v3 because if you take Lucian, Alistar, Lulu, and you put it up against Ezreal, Bard, Jax, or Ezreal, Bard, Udyr, CLG is going to win that. If you take, let's say, LeBlanc, Lucian, Lulu, and you put it up against Ezreal, Corki, Jax, or Ezreal, Corki, Udyr, CLG is going to win that. If you take Lee Sin, Alistar, Lucian, and you put it up against, I don't know, Udyr, Jax, Corki, CLG is going to win that. So they don't even have the outs to a neutral fight. Cloud9 is much more reliant on their entire team comp staying alive than CLG is because of CLG's flexibility inside of their comp. So it's a little bit awkward. It doesn't necessarily mean that the picks are bad for Cloud9, it just means that there is a glaringly obvious weakness that they have, and it's able to be abused if CLG does anything accordingly. But I feel like they will win via split push because Cloud9 really doesn't have an adequate answer to that, and once the game gets too long, LeBlanc isn't even going to be able to go and assist Lulu and shutting down Jax. So we can just say that right off the surface. So if you're Cloud9, you have to be cognizant of the bot lane, and you also have to be cognizant of warding up your own red side jungle because of the Udyr dynamic to back up and assist Jax in the later stages. So, but I haven't watched the game. So this is going to be fun because normally I do the LCS Discord live discussion reviews, but I didn't this week. I was really tired and I was trying to catch up on a lot of stuff, so we're back to doing a speed VOD review. I just want to make sure that this is ×2 speed because I don't want it to be a normal speed. I like a fan out. I think a fan out's really interesting. And it doesn't look like they're going to go for a split push, which I think is a little bit bizarre, because if you don't go for the split push, then that thing that we talked about inside of Champion Select with Lulu being blue side versus a red side Jax is directly going to work into favor of the Udyr Jax component on red side. And it's also actually going to hinder Lee Sin, because Lee Sin would definitely prefer to play a red-centric and east-centric river given these matchups. And I say that primarily because I think if you enable Bard Ezreal to go even in lane, then Alistar Lucian on the backs of a lane gank Lee Sin I think has a lot of potency. So having to draw Lee Sin, okay, well, never mind. They do a lane swap, but then I get, okay, so this is good. Still, this is going to benefit, it's going to benefit Jax more than it's going to benefit Lulu, of course. Had they gotten a direct lane swap off, it would have benefited Cloud9 much, much more. So this is completely fine. I don't like that. You should know that that never executes in terms of damage output. So I really don't like that by CLG. Although I think if you do something like that, okay, so like, look, all right, see this lane? What basically Udyr needs to do here, in a wait, why did that just happen? Hold on, we gotta rewind. Okay, so I know I want to pause as little as possible. Udyr is still relatively healthy, and now what you can do is something that I like to call the Bengi. And the reason that I call it the Bengi is because Bengi does it, he used to do it a lot in solo queue, and then he did it sometimes in competitive. So like, imagine if you're Udyr right here, you don't necessarily recall. what you end up doing is you wait for the teleport. And see this, what Lulu's doing? This is a must. This is a forced play. And because this is a forced play relative to how the lane is, and because Lulu now doesn't have teleport and she doesn't have flash, if you actually just wait, like say that you're like Bengi, and you wait inside of this brush, or you actually wait inside river brush, yes, Lee Sin could be on his way, but it's highly unlikely that he's going to be there at the same exact time that Lulu's there. If you can end up chunking Lulu to like 70% of her HP gone, and then Jax gets a recall and he gets the corrupting pot and he comes back into a freeze lock lane, basically Lulu loses. So, like, the Bengi, or, like, I call it the Bengi. There's technically no terminology. It's just the terminology that I used for it, when I was coaching a while ago, last year. It's really powerful, and I think it's an underused tool. And even though it ends up setting the jungler back slightly, the advantage that is given to your top laner it can't be described. It's just way too strong. But you can only do it if certain situations align. You can't just do it, like, don't just wait inside of the brush and then go for a gank again. That's not how it works. Like, all the variables have to line up, and then you have to go for it in order for it to be truly effective. And if you can get a kill off it, the game's probably over, in all seriousness. So it's not necessarily bad what CLG did, but I feel like there definitely could have been more used. Did Jensen just kill Hui? Okay, no. What I like is that as League is seemingly progressing more and more, you start seeing more pushes for exact damage ratios, which is really nice, because that's something that wasn't being used for a long time, where people didn't know exactly how much damage they did. I don't like that Rush showed himself going down to bottom, because you could have known that CLG didn't have any wards and thus didn't really know what direction Rush would have been going to, and then they end up actually losing, because they're never going to win the 2v2 like that this early unless Lulu has 6, and if it's not a Lee Sin match gank. If Lee Sin matches or counter ganks, then Cloud9 can win the fight, dependent on Jax's cooldowns and how much he invested into Lulu before Lee Sin would show himself. But other than that, and any sort of proactive gank or anything, if CLG matches or CLG just gets an initiative gank and it's just straight up 2v2, Cloud9's always going to lose it. This is a little bit interesting by High. I guess it's not the worst thing in the world. Although he did end up blowing flash. I think even if he hits anything there, I don't think actually anything comes from it. So that's a little bit interesting. Maybe it was just trying to trade summoners. But I think when that wow Aphromu, you're a god. I think in instances like this, now that you know that, I also don't like the trade off onto LeBlanc giving trying to give her blue and then she was just going to recall. Maybe she wasn't going to recall if she didn't get the blue, but I think it's relatively poor anyway, because then it basically shows that you're tunneled and now going on the east-hand side as Lee Sin, because you have no business going on to the left-hand side. And it seems like they know that, so they rotate everything back down to bottom lane, and Lee Sin now makes his way over, and now he's going to play east-centric. So this is the stuff that we talked about in the very beginning of the game, relative to the team comps, and the lanes and how they're going to play out. So now with CLG basically having an initiative in the top lane, I expect them that they're just going to take this tower down, and now the onus is on Jax to be able to hold bottom tower, and Udyr should actually rotate down, and they should do a two-man lane with Jax and Udyr, and then as long as they can hold it, and then, well, now they can't, it's too late. I mean, the VOD is moving, so I'm talking a little bit in the past, like 20 seconds, 30 seconds. If they could have done that, and they could have held bot lane for some reason, and then reinitiate a line swap, and then you just keep Jax there while Ezreal and Bard unite, you can just shove it back into bot lane, and then you can use that as dragon timing, and then potentially C9 basically hands the wave back into Jax in top lane, and then you're able to conserve teleport, and that's really, really powerful, because then it opens up a lot of windows of opportunity in bot lane. And now basically in mid lane, when you have the power spike on Corki relative to the blue buff and LeBlanc not having a blue, you can definitely play around that relative to neutral objectives. And then because Corki has this blue buff, you could actually, well, he could have used it to push LeBlanc out of lane, basically attacking our mana, and if he did that and he gained control of the vision on the sides of the lane, you could have made use of the fact that your bot lane was re-rotated down to the bottom half of the map, and you could have gone for Herald timing with Udyr and Jax along with Corki. And then if you do that, you can attack your mana even more in the mid lane if you give the Rift Herald to Corki, because there's no reason to give the Herald up to top lane, because you'll end up fucking up the top lane because there's no top lane tower for Cloud9. This doesn't... Okay, and so now they're going, like, Cloud9's decision to trade these towers doesn't make any sense. It will grant them some temporary safety, because now Jax can't really make too much use of this lane for, like, the next 15 minutes or so relative to his core item completions. And now they rotate down Hui, and this isn't the worst, but I think if you're Cloud9 and you realize this, it's really easy to just do a 3-0-2. And even if you don't do a 3-0-2, you could do a 3-2-0 because they're never actually going to be able to break the last inhibitor tower. Okay, well, this is just actually really sloppy. Wow. 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 Okay. I feel like I would have to watch that again to really talk about what's happening, although I did feel like I caught most of it. Rotating down Lucian is completely fine now. And just have Lucian CS as slow as possible in bot lane. Because you don't want to shove that back into CLG. Or if you do shove it back into CLG, you want to make sure that it's a Glacier. And the reason that you want to Glacier it is because then it can tie up Jax if he chooses to freeze it. And if he does freeze it, which isn't necessarily a bad choice, it's just a move that you can do to initiate control over the game. Sometimes you have to do moves which it's not bad for you and it's not bad for the opponent. Like, it's good for you and it's good for the opponent. Moves like that can exist. Sometimes doing something that your opponent wants is actually going to be correct relative to the moves that are going to be granted to you in the near future because of it. It's like trading pieces in chess. Now they rotate back down Ezreal and Bard, and I don't really like that. I think Bard should just be playing mid-centric now in terms of ward control and vision. Ezreal probably can just be fine on his own. Keep spamming up until his Mirror Mana and getting his Iceborne Gauntlet. He's relatively safe with the wards that are given to him. Lee Sin doesn't have enough mobility to close all that gap, especially not without boots. So you don't really have to be afraid of anything yet. Now it looks like they're prepping for Dragon, and I think that this is fine. CLG does benefit from the second Dragon. They don't actually need the first Dragon just yet. It obviously is luxury. The reason that they don't benefit from the second Dragon is because all of the tier 1 towers are basically opened up, and then some of the tier 2 towers are softened. So it's not like they can make too much use out of it. Obviously it'll come into play in the later stages, but we're talking like 30 minutes. Having Jax in top lane, this is that thing that we talked about in Champion Select, where Jax is a unique champ in that he actually can split push the top lane tower. There's not too many champions that can do that. Okay, what just, hello? That was so weird. Okay, I don't know what Jax just did. They didn't zoom in on it quick enough. I also don't understand the Titanic Hydra. I feel like Gunsu, well, maybe Gunsu, I don't know. I've never seen a Titanic Hydra. So before I criticize it or anything, I would have to do research. But just on the surface, I don't think that seems very, very good. Maybe his thought is that he doesn't really have sticking potential to some of the champions that he's going to be attacking, even if he has like the ability to stick in terms of like short cooldowns, or if Lulu doesn't have her Whimsy up, or LeBlanc's Monolith, whatever. Like, obviously situations can occur where Jax is going to be able to stick okay, but maybe the thought process is just to get in and get out with Hydra, but I'm not really so sure. I think the item is being overestimated in terms of its worth. I don't like with how accelerated the game is, though, that Jax is just staying on his tier 1 boots. I think it would be a nice investment just to get to the tier 2 boots now. Now it looks like CLG is going to take control of this dragon, and this is fine. And then you should just actually... Oh, it doesn't look like... It looks like... Well, I can't see bot lane. I can't actually see what minions are on Cloud9 side versus CLG. I think sending Jax down here isn't necessarily the best choice, depending on how that lane is looking. Because you can basically just use your tier 1 tower as a sacrifice. This is basically a pawn. You could have basically let this happen and then just kept Udyr top after he went into his own side jungle, and you could have rotated Ezreal and Bard into mid lane to basically force LeBlanc behind her tower and basically attack her blue buff to reduce its efficiency. These are really bizarre champion rotations. A lot of them just don't make sense. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it looks like it makes sense on the surface, but then if you add like 30 seconds, 45 seconds into the future into the equation, it doesn't make sense. Wow, Lee Sin can kill I wonder if Lee Sin could have killed him straight up. That would be really weird. I don't think so. Having Jax go back to top. This is a little weird. Like they're playing it very fast, but it's not like Cloud9 isn't keeping up in terms of pace. So it's a little interesting, like how they're playing it. It's very split pushy, and now you see the Zizirot or the Zerot portal coming out of Udyr. So that's really interesting. I guess that we'll expect that Zizirot will be devoted to top lane, and then Jax will just keep his attention in bot lane, because that is still going to be the most beneficial lane for him to be in. Top lane's a very awkward lane to split push, especially the longer the game goes on, and that's primarily because of the Baron component. This is really good by Zion. Now it looks like they're calling for a flank. And the thing with this flank is that if CLG goes even inside of the fight, Jax is able to conserve his teleport. And now they end up just shredding that fight, so that's really, really good. This is the thing with Cloud9, is like they're so reliant on all the pieces to their puzzle being there. Like their team comp doesn't have a lot of utility if not everything is existing. Like they'll never win 3v3s, they're never going to win. Well, they're not so bad inside of, well, they're not so bad inside of a 4v4, but still the edges to CLG. I think the only thing that they actually win inside of is like very unique 2v2s. Everything 3v3, 4v4, 5v5 they lose in terms of like a straight up engagement or like an extended periodic fight. And thus, you know, you might ask yourself, well, then how do they win fights? Well, we already talked about LeBlanc's assassination on Debard as a key component. And then we also, you know, you can outmaneuver CLG by matching them at every point, because CLG cannot actually finish or end the game through standard means without accelerating in other areas via the split push or via the poke and stall. So obviously you don't want to drag the game to like 40 minutes, but there is timing windows against Ezreal and Corki that you can make use of in the mid to late game transition where they'll be vulnerable. And then obviously Cloud9, if you can outmaneuver them on the map and secure Barons, etc., that's going to aid in getting it. That is so sick by Aphromoo. Rush ends up getting it, but then the team fight breaks out, and you're never going to win a team fight, especially not if you're behind. Cloud9, I don't understand what they're doing. But I don't think the game is... I don't think the game's over. Luden's Echo on LeBlanc, there's a Reddit post on it. It always deals less damage than Deathcap. Unless he's using it for the mobility. If you're factoring in the mobility into it, even then I don't think that it makes that much sense, because the game's already busted too wide open. So I really don't like it. It would probably just actually... I don't know how much movement speed it actually gives to LeBlanc off the top of my head. But I think you could just invest into the green boot enchantment and then just play smarter with better vision control. I don't think devoting an entire item slot to that is very efficient. Especially because the damage that CLG has is they don't really care about the poke, and you're also not going to be able to reliably proc it on them because of the way that they team fight. Now Jackson bot lane. He doesn't have teleport, but Lulu does. So this is fine. But Lulu's gonna... Would Lulu have killed him? I don't... Well, maybe he messed up. Okay, so now you saw Corki go down, but you can see that CLG... Like, they're losing the fight, but they were able to kite backwards a little bit. So that was a really good fight for Cloud9, but you can see that there's going to be issues that are going to arise later if you assume that CLG is going to be able to position accordingly. Okay. This is really weird. So CLG is basically overextending, and they're not making use of the stall component. And Cloud9 is capitalizing on that, so that's really good. And they're doing what they need to. They need to bait CLG into overextending, because CLG doesn't win in an overextended fight in terms of chasing Cloud9. They do win in extended fights, which are a little bit different, but note the over before the extended. And obviously when I say extended fight, I mean like a 30-second fight or something that is continuously occurring. When I say overextended, what I'm trying to say is like CLG ends up trying to chase Cloud9. They don't really have too much of a chase component unless they get like Righteous Glory or something like that. Even Ezreal's slows aren't reliable enough. So okay, now you need the Zerat portal. So now if you're CLG, what you want is you want the Zerat portal in top lane, and you want Jax in bot lane. And what you want to do is you want to try to orchestrate team fights that Jax can walk up to try to get to. You force the teleport out of Lulu, and then if Jax has teleport advantage over Lulu, you kind of just play with that in Cloud9's mind, and then you just go for a split push anyway. You don't actually want to take team fights right now. Like, there's so much more to be gained, and you have so much like picking power away at Cloud9. Don't take the fight. There's no reason to do this. Like, CLG is playing their comp so poorly. Like, they're doing the Jax component relatively okay. Like, what would Cloud9 do right now, right? In this situation. Like, what would they do? There's no reason to be doing this if you're CLG. Like, you want to be fighting inside of choke points and using your stall via Ezreal and Corki. Udyr is just basically the guy that, like, he's your big brother. He's like what was that childhood story? It's like the big guy, Freak the Mighty. Udyr's like Freak the Mighty. Like, if they get onto your twink that is Ezreal, like, Udyr needs to just go and constantly peel. But they don't need to be taking team fights right now at all. Now this is good because now Cloud9's overextended. And then CLG ends up winning. And so now when this ends... Oh, wow, they stopped the recall and Balls is going to go down. Oh, he's running, but I don't think you can run from Udyr. Actually, I don't like the flash there, and the reason that I don't like the flash is because the continuous chase would, I think, actually be better. Because she's gonna end up dying, and then her death timer is gonna be delayed. But what is really gained by Udyr killing her there? Not too much. So I think that an extended chase is gonna be better in almost every case. So now all that you really have to do is you just keep Jax in bot lane. Whether or not he has teleport is completely irrelevant, because he can just end the entire game. And now Cloud9 is going to go to 3 dragons, but that doesn't do too much. It does help them out a little bit. And now also with the 3rd dragon component, the Ludens even loses more efficiency. You can argue that it gains efficiency, but it doesn't. Now this is all that you really need to do. And now you don't want to necessarily take a team fight. This is where you use the gear that you do have with the poke. So you just want to proc and prod Cloud9 while Jax basically pokes them and like cuts away at their heal in the bottom. And then when this is happening, Lulu doesn't really have any arguing tool against Jax. So you can just perma split push. And we said that this was going to be an issue from the very beginning, and now Jax is also getting too big, where LeBlanc doesn't even really begin to threaten him. Because, like, if Jax, like, gets Guardian Angel or gets Banshee's Veil, LeBlanc is nothing to him. I actually didn't look at the items for, like, the last few minutes. Do they just end? And that is going to be it. CLG is playing so well. They did a lot of mistakes in the mid game relative to their comp, but I think that was basically fine. If we're gonna recap on a few of the issues, Basically, it was Cloud9 not understanding that CLG's comp is too proactive. And because CLG's comp is entirely proactive, there is actually nothing that Cloud9 had in terms of like a gear that they could have used to make CLG become reactive. And because of that, when you're facing a team comp, or when you're facing, just when you're facing team comps that are entirely proactive, what you want to do is, instead of trying to force yourself to be proactive and them reactive, obviously in some cases there's going to be the ability for that to happen, or that is an option that you can eventually, use against them, depending on some variable like a Baron, or like a 5th dragon, or maybe a certain dragon timing or something. But for the most part, when you're facing something like this, rather than trying to just beat them and outspeed them and, out-rotate them, etc., instead you just want to match them at every single angle, and then eventually there's going to be this timing window where they sort of have to reload, and in the sense of like reloading, which is going to be like that timing attack that you can use against Jax and Ezreal, where they temporarily fall off for a short duration because of item completions, etc. You can use that window of opportunity to basically launch your assault. And if you do it during that small timing window, then they end up crumbling. But for the most part, you do just have to match them at every single angle, and then outplay them at the points that they're trying to attack from. So basically, this type of a win for Cloud9, if they want to get it, it's going to be a victory through defense. And CLG's entire victory tool is obviously going to be victory through pressure, but sometimes that pressure can even change its gear into defense via the Zizurot portal and the threat from a split push from Jax and feigning of